The grease-stained coveralls and calloused hands should have been the first warning that Mike Thompson didn't belong in the polished marble lobby of Downtown Plaza. But there he sat, across from Harrison Brooks, a man whose Armani suit probably cost more than Mike's monthly garage revenue, trying to explain why his small auto shop deserved $1 million fleet maintenance contract. Brooks' dismissive smirk said everything his polite words didn't. The way he glanced at his Rolex, the condescending tone when he mentioned established partnerships with reputable firms. Then she appeared, a woman in an elegant cream blazer, moving with the quiet confidence of someone who had never doubted her place in rooms like this. She slid into the chair beside Mike, her manicured hand finding his work-roughened one with surprising naturalness. "Sorry I'm late, honey," she said, her voice carrying just enough authority to make Brooks straighten in his chair. The board meeting ran over. Mike's heart hammered against his ribs as he tried to process what was happening. The woman beside him smelled like expensive perfume and power, nothing like the motor oil and coffee that defined his daily existence. Her fingers were cool against his palm, but her grip was steady, reassuring even. Brooks' entire demeanor shifted like someone had flipped a switch. His condescending smirk melted into something resembling respectful attention. The way his eyes darted between Mike and this mysterious woman suggested he was rapidly recalculating whatever assumptions he'd made about the small-town mechanic. "Mrs. Thompson," Brooks said, though uncertainty flickered in his voice. "I wasn't aware you'd be joining us today." The woman, apparently Mrs. Thompson now, tilted her head with the practiced grace of someone accustomed to boardrooms and power plays. "My husband doesn't like to mention our personal connection to business matters," she said smoothly. "He prefers his work to speak for itself, which is exactly why Thompson Auto deserves this contract." Mike found himself studying her profile as she spoke. High cheekbones, auburn hair pulled back in a sleek bun, eyes the color of winter storms. She spoke about his business with an intimacy that suggested she'd known him for years, mentioning details about his customer service record and mechanical expertise that he'd barely touched on in his presentation. Brooks was nodding now, taking notes, asking follow-up questions that treated Mike's proposal with newfound seriousness. 20 minutes later, Mike walked out of that building with a handshake agreement for a 6-month trial contract that could change everything for his struggling business. The woman who'd claimed to be his wife walked beside him in silence until they reached the parking garage. Only then did she stop and turn to face him, her composed mask slipping just enough to reveal exhaustion underneath. "I'm Victoria Sterling," she said simply. "And I need your help." Mike's calloused hands found his pockets, a defensive gesture he'd developed over years of dealing with people who looked through him rather than at him. "Lady, I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but I can't afford to get mixed up in whatever this is." Victoria's laugh held no humor. "Trust me, Mr. Thompson, neither can I. But sometimes we don't get to choose our circumstances." She explained it in measured sentences, her words carefully chosen like someone accustomed to negotiations and contracts. Her father owned Sterling Industries, a corporate empire that included everything from real estate development to manufacturing. He'd been pressuring her to marry Harrison Brooks, the same man who'd been dismissing Mike's business proposal as part of some larger business merger. The fake husband routine was her desperate attempt to buy time and maintain some control over her own life. "Why me?" Mike asked, genuinely puzzled. Victoria studied his face for a long moment. "Because you looked like someone who understood what it meant to fight for something that mattered. And because Brooks would never believe I'd marry someone beneath my social status unless it was real." The honesty in her voice caught him off guard. Most people in his experience either pitied him or ignored him. Victoria Sterling did neither. Mike thought about Emma, his 8-year-old daughter who'd been asking why other kids had mommies, and she didn't. He thought about the stack of unpaid bills on his kitchen table and the contract he'd just secured through this woman's intervention. "What exactly would you need me to do?" he heard himself asking. Victoria's relief was visible. "Attend a few family functions, maybe have dinner once or twice where people might see us. Nothing complicated. Just enough to convince my father that I'm settled and unavailable for his matchmaking schemes." The arrangement they sketched out seemed simple enough. A few public appearances, some carefully staged interactions, and both of them would get what they needed. She'd gain time and autonomy. He'd keep the contract that might save his business. Neither of them mentioned the obvious complications, the way their worlds couldn't be more different, or how pretending to be married might blur lines that should stay clear. But as Mike drove his dented pickup truck back to his neighborhood of modest houses and chain-link fences, he couldn't shake the memory of Victoria's composed facade, cracking just enough to show the vulnerability underneath. He'd recognized something familiar in that moment, the look of someone carrying more weight than they should have to bear alone. It was a look he saw in his own mirror every morning when he thought about raising Emma without her mother, about keeping his business afloat, about all the ways he felt like he was failing at this life he'd never asked for. Victoria Sterling might live in a world of marble lobbies and Armani suits, but apparently even people with money and power could feel trapped by circumstances beyond their control. The realization sat uneasily with him as he pulled into his driveway and saw Emma's face pressed against the living room window, waiting for him to come home and tell her about his day. 3 days later, Mike found himself standing in front of his bedroom mirror, adjusting the collar of the only dress shirt he owned that didn't have permanent grease stains. Victoria had invited him to a charity gala at the Riverside Country Club, their first public appearance as a married couple. The reflection staring back at him looked uncomfortable and out of place, like a kid playing dress-up in his father's clothes. Emma bounced on his bed, offering unsolicited fashion advice. "Daddy, you look nervous. Are you going on a date?" The question hit closer to home than his 8-year-old daughter could possibly understand. "It's not a date, sweetheart. It's just business." Emma's skeptical expression suggested she wasn't buying his explanation, but she didn't push the subject. Mrs. Garcia from next door arrived to babysit, and Mike drove to the address Victoria had given him, a gleaming high-rise in the financial district. The doorman's polite nod suggested he'd been expecting Mike, another small detail that reminded him how thoroughly Victoria planned everything. She answered the door wearing a black cocktail dress that probably cost more than his monthly mortgage payment, her hair arranged in soft waves that framed her face perfectly. "You clean up nicely, Mr. Thompson," she said with a smile that seemed more genuine than their previous interactions. "Please, call me Mike. If we're supposed to be married, we should probably use first names." Victoria's laugh was warm and unexpected. "Fair point. Victoria will do fine." As they walked to his truck, Mike felt acutely aware of how ridiculous they must look, her elegant sophistication next to his working-class practicality. The charity gala was everything Mike had expected, and worse. Crystal chandeliers, orchestral music, and conversations about stock portfolios and vacation homes in the Hamptons. Victoria navigated the social landscape with practiced ease, introducing Mike to various business associates and family friends with the same confident composure she'd shown during the Brooks meeting. She spoke about their relationship with convincing warmth, weaving a narrative about how they'd met through mutual friends and connected over their shared values. Mike found himself admiring her performance, the way she made their fictional romance sound believable, without crossing into territory that made either of them uncomfortable. She deflected personal questions with skillful redirection, praised his work ethic and integrity to anyone who would listen, and somehow managed to make him feel like he belonged in a room where his truck probably cost less than most people's watches. Harrison Brooks approached them during the cocktail hour, his expression carefully neutral. "Victoria, what a surprise seeing you here with your husband." The pause before the last word carried just enough skepticism to suggest he wasn't entirely convinced by their act. Victoria's hand found Mike's arm with natural intimacy. "Harrison, you remember Mike from the other day. I was just telling the Weatherbys about his expansion plans for Thompson Auto." The conversation that followed was a masterclass in social warfare disguised as polite small talk. Brooks probed their relationship with questions designed to expose inconsistencies, while Victoria parried each attempt with details that suggested intimate knowledge of Mike's life and business. Mike found himself jumping in when Brooks implied that Victoria might be slumming for the novelty of dating outside her social circle. "My wife sees people for who they are, not what they own," Mike said quietly. "That's just one of the reasons I fell in love with her." The words surprised him with their sincerity, and he caught Victoria's sharp glance in his peripheral vision. Brooks' smile grew thin. How refreshingly authentic. "Well, I'm sure you two will be very happy together." As Brooks walked away, Victoria's grip on Mike's arm tightened briefly, a silent thank you that spoke louder than words. The evening progressed smoother after that confrontation. Victoria introduced Mike to her father, Richard Sterling, a silver-haired man whose handshake was firm and whose eyes missed nothing. "So you're the mechanic who's captured my daughter's heart," Sterling said with the tone of someone conducting an interview. Mike met his gaze steadily. "I'm the man who loves your daughter, sir. The mechanic part is just how I make a living." Sterling's expression remained unreadable, but something flickered behind his eyes. Approval, perhaps, or at least acknowledgement that Mike wasn't easily intimidated. The conversation moved to safer topics like the charity's mission and local business development, but Mike felt the weight of evaluation throughout their interaction. As the evening wound down, Mike and Victoria found themselves on the club's terrace, away from the crowd and noise. The city sparkled below them, a sea of lights that made everything seem possible. "You did well in there," Victoria said softly. "Especially with Brooks and my father." Mike leaned against the railing, studying her profile in the moonlight. "This isn't going to work long-term, is it? People like your father don't give up easily." Victoria's sigh carried the weight of years of family expectations and corporate politics. "No, he doesn't. But it buys me time to figure out my next move." They stood in comfortable silence for several minutes, the pretense of their arrangement temporarily forgotten in the quiet intimacy of the moment. Mike found himself wondering what Victoria's life was really like beneath the polished exterior, what dreams she might have sacrificed to meet her family's expectations. "Tell me about your daughter," Victoria said suddenly. The request caught Mike off guard. In all their planning and preparation, Emma had been mentioned only in passing. "Emma's 8, smart as a whip and twice as stubborn. She's been asking questions about why other kids have mothers and she doesn't." Victoria's expression softened. "How long has it been?" 3 years. Car accident. Sarah was coming home from her sister's house when someone ran a red light." The words still hurt to say, even after all this time. Victoria reached out and touched his hand gently. "I'm sorry. That must be incredibly difficult." There was genuine sympathy in her voice, no trace of pity or awkward platitudes. "Emma's been the bright spot through all of it. Some days she's the only reason I get out of bed." Victoria nodded, as if she understood something about carrying impossible responsibilities alone. As Mike drove Victoria home that night, they established new boundaries for their arrangement. More family functions would be necessary to maintain credibility, but they agreed to keep Emma out of their charade as much as possible. Victoria would help Mike navigate the social expectations of their fake relationship, while he would provide the authenticity that made their story believable. What neither of them acknowledged was how natural their conversation had become, or how Victoria's carefully constructed walls had begun showing small cracks. They were entering dangerous territory, where the lines between performance and reality might become impossible to distinguish. The following Saturday, Victoria surprised Mike by showing up at Thompson Auto unannounced. She wore jeans and a simple sweater instead of her usual business attire, looking younger and more approachable than he'd ever seen her. Emma was at the shop with him, working on homework at his desk while he finished up a brake job.
"You must be Emma,"
Victoria said, crouching down to the little girl's eye level. "I've heard wonderful things about you." Emma looked up from her math worksheet with the serious expression she wore when meeting new adults. "Are you Daddy's girlfriend?" The direct question made both adults freeze. Victoria handled it with grace. "I'm your daddy's friend Victoria. We work together sometimes." Emma accepted this explanation with the pragmatic flexibility of childhood and returned to her homework. But Mike noticed how she watched Victoria throughout the afternoon, studying this new presence in their familiar space. Victoria, for her part, seemed genuinely interested in Emma's chatter about school and friends, asking follow-up questions that suggested she was actually listening rather than just being polite. When Emma went to the bathroom, Victoria wandered around the garage, examining Mike's tools and equipment with curious eyes. "You really know what you're doing," she observed, running her fingers along the edge of his workbench. "Brooks was an idiot to dismiss you." Mike wiped his hands on a shop rag, watching her explore his world with the same focused attention she brought to everything else. "Your father seemed skeptical too." Victoria's expression grew complicated. "My father judges everything by profit margins and quarterly reports. He doesn't understand that some things can't be measured that way." There was sadness in her voice that made Mike wonder what dreams Richard Sterling might have dismissed as insufficiently profitable. "What did you want to be?" he asked impulsively. "Before all the corporate expectations and family business." Victoria's smile was wistful. "A teacher. Elementary education. I wanted to help kids discover that learning could be exciting." The revelation shifted something in Mike's perception of her. He could picture Victoria in a classroom, her natural authority channeled into nurturing young minds rather than navigating corporate politics. "What stopped you?" Victoria gestured vaguely toward the world beyond his garage. "Sterling Industries needed an heir. My father's health scare 5 years ago made it clear that I was expected to step up. Teaching became a hobby rather than a career." Emma returned from the bathroom carrying a small bouquet of dandelions she'd picked from the vacant lot next door. Without hesitation, she walked up to Victoria and held out the flowers. "These are for you because you're pretty and you asked good questions about my math." Victoria's eyes grew suspiciously bright as she accepted the makeshift bouquet. "Thank you, Emma. They're beautiful." Mike watched this exchange with growing unease. Emma hadn't shown this kind of immediate trust toward any woman since her mother died. The easy way Victoria responded to his daughter's gesture suggested a natural warmth that her corporate persona usually kept hidden. They were venturing into territory that could complicate their arrangement in ways neither of them had anticipated. That evening, after Emma had gone to bed, Mike found himself thinking about Victoria's abandoned teaching dreams and the way she'd looked when Emma gave her those dandelions. Their fake marriage was supposed to be temporary and transactional, but real emotions were starting to creep into the performance. He wondered if Victoria was experiencing the same confusion, the same dangerous blurring of lines between what was convenient and what might be genuine. The crisis came 3 weeks later, during what was supposed to be a simple dinner at Sterling Industries' annual client appreciation event. Mike had grown more comfortable with these social situations, learning to navigate conversations about business and politics without feeling completely out of his depth. Victoria had been an excellent teacher, coaching him on names and relationships, helping him understand the unspoken rules of her world. But Richard Sterling had been doing his own investigation. Mike realized something was wrong when Sterling approached them near the bar, his expression more serious than usual. "Victoria, I'd like to speak with you and your husband privately. My office, if you don't mind." It wasn't really a request. Sterling's corner office overlooked the city, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view that emphasized his position at the top of the corporate hierarchy. He gestured for them to sit, then remained standing behind his massive desk like a judge preparing to deliver a verdict. "I've had some interesting conversations with Harrison Brooks," Sterling began without preamble. "Seems he's been asking around about your marriage, Victoria, checking public records, talking to mutual acquaintances." Victoria's composure never wavered, but Mike could feel tension radiating from her like heat. "I hope you told him that my personal life is none of his business." Sterling's laugh held no warmth. "I told him what any father would tell a family friend, expressing concern about his daughter's welfare, but his questions got me curious, so I did some checking of my own." The folder Sterling opened on his desk contained what looked like a comprehensive background report. "Michael Thomas Thompson, age 34, owner of Thompson Auto Repair, widower, 1 dependent child. Good credit, no criminal record, solid reputation in his community. Also no marriage license filed with Victoria Catherine Sterling at any point in the last 5 years." The silence that followed was deafening. Victoria's carefully constructed facade cracked, revealing the vulnerability Mike had glimpsed that first night in the parking garage. "Daddy, I can explain." Sterling held up a hand to cut her off. "No explanation necessary, darling. I understand exactly what this is. The question now is what we're going to do about it." Mike stood up slowly, his working-class pride finally overriding his intimidation by Sterling's power. "Mr. Sterling, this was my idea. Victoria was just trying to help me with a business problem." It was a lie, but Mike couldn't stand watching Victoria face her father's disappointment alone. Sterling's eyes narrowed as he studied Mike with renewed interest. "How much?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. "I'm sorry?" Mike replied, though he suspected he understood. "How much will it take for you to disappear from my daughter's life permanently? The contract with Brooks Industries can be cancelled just as easily as it was created. Your business will fold within 6 months without that revenue stream. So let's discuss terms." Mike felt something cold settle in his stomach. This was the moment he'd been dreading since Victoria first approached him, the inevitable confrontation with the reality of their different worlds. Sterling was offering him a way out, probably with enough money to keep his business afloat for years. All he had to do was walk away from whatever this complicated relationship with Victoria had become. "There are no terms, Mr. Sterling," Mike said quietly, "because I'm not going anywhere." Victoria's sharp intake of breath was audible. Sterling's eyebrows rose in what might have been surprise or respect. "Even if it costs you your business? Your daughter's financial security?" The threat was implicit but clear. Mike thought about Emma, about the bills piling up on his kitchen table, about all the practical reasons he should take whatever Sterling was offering and retreat to the safety of his own world. "My daughter's security doesn't depend on money she didn't earn," Mike said. "And my business will succeed or fail based on the quality of my work, not on contracts gained through deception." Sterling leaned back in his chair, studying Mike with the attention of someone reassessing a previously dismissed opponent. "Interesting. Most men in your position would have negotiated a higher price by now." Victoria had remained silent throughout this exchange, but now she stood up beside Mike, her composure fully restored. "Daddy, what Mike and I have is real. Maybe it didn't start that way, but it became something genuine." The words surprised Mike even as he heard them, because they contained more truth than either of them had previously acknowledged. Sterling's expression softened almost imperceptibly, as he looked at his daughter. "Victoria, you're 32 years old. You could have any man in the city, men who could offer you the life you deserve, who understand your world and your responsibilities." Victoria's voice remained steady. "The life I deserve? You mean the life you've planned for me? The corporate marriage to Harrison Brooks that serves Sterling Industries better than it serves me?" The conversation that followed revealed years of accumulated tension between father and daughter. Sterling's expectations, Victoria's sacrificed dreams, the weight of family legacy and corporate responsibility. Mike found himself witnessing an intensely personal confrontation that had been building long before he entered Victoria's life. "I spent my 20s becoming the perfect corporate heir," Victoria said, her voice rising slightly. "I gave up teaching. I dated men you approved of. I put Sterling Industries before every personal relationship I've ever had. But I won't marry someone I don't love to close a business deal, even for you." Sterling's face remained impassive, but something flickered in his eyes. Hurt, perhaps, or the recognition that his daughter had inherited more of his stubborn determination than he'd realized. "And you think you love him?" Sterling gestured toward Mike without looking at him. Victoria's hesitation lasted only a moment. "Yes, I do." The admission sent shockwaves through Mike's entire worldview. This was supposed to be a performance, a mutually beneficial arrangement with clear boundaries and no real emotional investment. But Victoria had just declared her love for him in front of her father, and the words didn't sound like part of any script they'd rehearsed. Sterling stood up and walked to his window, looking out at the city lights below. When he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of someone making a difficult decision. "The contract with Brooks Industries will stand. Your personal choices are your own, Victoria, but they come with consequences. If you choose this path, don't expect Sterling Industries to bail you out when reality sets in." The dismissal was clear. As they left Sterling's office, Mike felt like he was walking through a dream where nothing quite made sense. Victoria remained silent until they reached the parking garage, where she finally stopped and turned to face him. "I'm sorry," she said simply. "I never intended for it to get this complicated." Mike studied her face in the fluorescent lighting, searching for clues about what had just happened upstairs. "Did you mean what you said? About loving me?" Victoria's composure finally cracked completely. "I don't know. Maybe. Does it matter? My father will make sure the contract gets cancelled, your business will suffer, and we'll both be worse off than when we started this charade." But Mike was thinking about Emma's fascination with Victoria, about quiet conversations on country club terraces, about the way Victoria's eyes had lit up when she talked about teaching. "What if it wasn't a charade anymore?" he heard himself asking. "What if we tried making this real?" Victoria's laugh was shaky. "Mike, we live in completely different worlds. I don't know how to change a tire, and you've probably never been to an opera. What could we possibly have in common besides a fake marriage that's about to blow up in our faces?" Mike stepped closer, close enough to see the uncertainty and hope warring in her eyes. "We both know what it's like to put other people's needs before our own. We both understand responsibility and sacrifice, and we both care about Emma." The truth of those words settled between them like a foundation they could build on. Victoria's walls were fully down now, revealing someone who was tired of performing and pretending, who wanted something genuine, even if it came with risks and complications. "Your father's not going to make this easy," Mike warned. "Neither will Brooks or anyone else who thinks you're making a mistake." Victoria's smile was the first completely unguarded expression he'd seen from her. "Let them think what they want. I'm tired of living my life for other people's approval." As they kissed for the first time, really kissed, not for show or to maintain their cover, Mike realized that their fake marriage had somehow become the most genuine relationship either of them had experienced in years. The fallout began almost immediately. Sterling Industries cancelled the Brooks contract within 48 hours, citing performance concerns that everyone understood were really about family politics. Mike's business took an immediate hit, losing not just the revenue, but also the credibility that came with high-profile corporate clients. But something unexpected happened. Word spread through their small community about what Mike had done, choosing love and integrity over money and security. Other small business owners began bringing their vehicles to Thompson Auto, wanting to support someone who'd stood up to corporate bullying. The local newspaper ran a feature about Mike's garage, praising his honesty and work ethic. Within a month, he had more business than he could handle. Victoria faced her own challenges. Sterling Industries' board, influenced by her father's disappointment, began questioning her judgment and fitness for leadership roles. Harrison Brooks, emboldened by the family conflict, renewed his pursuit with public displays of interest that made Victoria's situation more difficult. But Victoria had found something in Mike's world that her corporate life had never provided: authenticity and genuine connection. She started volunteering at Emma's school, helping with reading programs, and discovering that her abandoned teaching dreams weren't as dead as she'd thought. The work fulfilled her in ways that quarterly reports and board meetings never had. Emma blossomed under Victoria's attention, finally having a maternal figure who listened to her concerns and celebrated her achievements. The three of them developed routines and traditions that felt like family. Saturday morning pancakes, homework help, bedtime stories that Victoria told with the skill of someone born to teach. The real test came 6 months later, when Richard Sterling had a mild heart attack that left him hospitalized for 2 weeks. Victoria spent every day at his bedside, despite their ongoing conflict about her relationship with Mike. During his recovery, Sterling had time to observe the way Victoria cared for him, the same gentle strength she'd learned from watching Mike with Emma. "I may have been wrong about your mechanic," Sterling admitted one evening as Victoria was adjusting his pillows. "He's taught you something I never could: how to be happy." Victoria's eyes filled with tears she'd been holding back for months. "He didn't teach me, Daddy. He just gave me permission to be myself." Sterling's recovery became the catalyst for reconciliation. He never fully approved of Victoria's choices, but he came to respect Mike's character and the stability their relationship provided. The wedding, their real wedding, was small and intimate, held in the backyard of Mike's modest house, with Emma as maid of honor and a handful of close friends as witnesses. Victoria never returned to Sterling Industries in a leadership capacity, instead using her business skills to help Mike expand Thompson Auto into a successful enterprise that employed 12 people from their neighborhood. She completed her teaching certification through night classes and eventually became the reading specialist at Emma's elementary school. The story that began with deception and social climbing evolved into something much more valuable: a genuine partnership built on mutual respect and shared values. Mike discovered that love didn't always look like what he'd expected, and Victoria learned that happiness wasn't measured by stock portfolios or corporate positions. Years later, when Emma graduated from high school as valedictorian, she thanked both of her parents in her speech: the father who'd taught her that integrity mattered more than money, and the mother who'd shown her that it was never too late to pursue your dreams. In the audience, Richard Sterling wiped away tears, finally understanding that his daughter had achieved something more precious than any business success. She'd built a life worth living. The fake marriage that started as a desperate scheme had become the foundation for genuine happiness, proving that sometimes the most unexpected partnerships can create the most beautiful families. Mike Thompson, the small-town mechanic who'd walked into that marble lobby feeling out of place, had found exactly where he belonged. But their journey wasn't without its final test. 2 years after their real wedding, Harrison Brooks made one last attempt to destroy what Mike and Victoria had built together. He'd never forgiven the humiliation of losing both the Sterling Industries merger and Victoria's hand to someone he considered beneath contempt. Brooks had been quietly investigating Thompson Auto's finances, looking for any irregularity he could exploit. When he discovered that Mike had used some of the original contract money to help other struggling small businesses in their neighborhood, technically a violation of the contract's terms, Brooks saw his opportunity for revenge. The lawsuit came without warning. Sterling Industries, under pressure from Brooks and other board members, filed breach of contract charges against Thompson Auto. The legal fees alone threatened to bankrupt Mike's business, and the negative publicity began driving customers away. Victoria watched helplessly as Mike shouldered the burden with characteristic, quiet determination, working 18-hour days to keep his employees paid while fighting the legal battle. Emma, now 10 years old, understood more about their situation than either adult realized. She'd inherited her father's practical wisdom and Victoria's strategic thinking, a combination that led her to an unexpected solution. During a family dinner where the adults were discussing their dwindling options, Emma looked up from her homework and asked a simple question that changed everything. "Why don't we tell everyone the truth?" she said, her young voice cutting through their worried conversation. "About how you two met and why you got married for real? People like true stories better than lies." Mike and Victoria exchanged glances, recognizing the wisdom in their daughter's innocent suggestion. Victoria had learned enough about her father's business practices over the years to know where the bodies were buried. She also understood that Brooks's vindictive lawsuit was motivated by personal revenge rather than legitimate business concerns. With Emma's encouragement and Mike's reluctant agreement, she decided to fight fire with fire. The press conference Victoria called sent shockwaves through the corporate community. Standing beside Mike in front of Thompson Auto, with Emma holding both their hands, Victoria told their complete story: the fake marriage arrangement, their genuine falling in love, and her father's initial opposition. But she didn't stop there. With the precision of someone trained in corporate warfare, Victoria exposed Brooks' history of using Sterling Industries' resources for personal vendettas. She revealed emails and documents showing how he'd manipulated board decisions to target businesses owned by people he disliked. Most damaging of all, she presented evidence that Brooks had been embezzling company funds to finance his own investment ventures. The revelation destroyed Brooks' reputation overnight. Sterling Industries' board, faced with a public relations nightmare and potential criminal liability, moved quickly to distance themselves from both Brooks and the lawsuit against Thompson Auto. Richard Sterling, watching his daughter's masterful handling of the crisis from his hospital bed, felt a complex mixture of pride and regret. "She learned that from you, you know," Mike said during one of his visits to Sterling's bedside. "The strategic thinking, the ability to see the big picture. You taught her well." Sterling's smile was rueful. "I taught her to be ruthless when necessary. You taught her to use that ruthlessness in service of something worthwhile." The lawsuit's dismissal came with a formal apology from Sterling Industries and a settlement that not only covered Mike's legal fees, but provided funding for the community development program Victoria had been planning. Thompson Auto became the anchor business in a revitalized neighborhood that attracted other small enterprises, creating jobs and opportunity for families who'd been struggling. Victoria's transformation was complete. The polished corporate executive who'd first appeared in that marble lobby had become someone entirely different: a teacher, a mother, a community advocate who used her business skills to lift others up rather than climb higher herself. She never missed Emma's school plays or soccer games, never let board meetings take priority over family dinner, never again allowed other people's expectations to define her happiness. Mike's quiet strength had become the foundation their family was built on. He'd proven that integrity and hard work could triumph over wealth and influence, that genuine love could bridge any social divide. His garage employed 15 people now, including several single fathers who understood the challenges of raising children alone. Emma grew up seeing both sides of her parents' worlds, the grease-stained coveralls and the corporate boardrooms, the calloused hands and the manicured nails. She learned that worth wasn't measured by bank accounts or social status, but by how you treated people and what you built with your life. On Emma's 16th birthday, Richard Sterling made a surprise announcement. He was establishing a scholarship fund in her name for children of single parents who wanted to pursue higher education. The fund would be administered jointly by Sterling Industries and Thompson Community Development, ensuring that both sides of Emma's heritage would work together to help other families. "Your parents taught me something important," Sterling told Emma at her birthday dinner. "Success isn't about what you accumulate for yourself. It's about what you build for others." Emma hugged her grandfather with the fierce affection of someone who'd learned to see beyond surface differences to the heart underneath. As Victoria and Mike sat on their back porch that evening, watching Emma show off her new car to friends, they reflected on the journey that had brought them together. What started as a desperate scheme to solve immediate problems had evolved into something neither of them could have imagined. A love story that transcended class boundaries, a family that had been created through choice rather than accident, a life built on authenticity rather than performance. "Do you ever wondered what would have happened if I hadn't walked into that lobby that day?" Victoria asked, leaning against Mike's shoulder. Mike's calloused hand found hers, with the same natural ease they'd shared since their first fake handshake. "No point in wondering," he said simply. "We found each other when we needed to. That's what matters." Victoria smiled at his practical wisdom, the same steady perspective that had first attracted her to this quiet man who'd never doubted his own worth, despite what others thought. "Emma was right, you know. People do like true stories better than lies." Their story had become legend in their community, the rich girl and the poor mechanic who'd found real love through a fake marriage. But Mike and Victoria knew the truth was more complex and more beautiful than any fairy tale. They'd each discovered that happiness couldn't be bought or inherited or strategically arranged. It had to be built, day by day, choice by choice, through the small acts of kindness and commitment that transformed two separate lives into one shared journey. As the sun set over their neighborhood, Mike's neighborhood, where Victoria had chosen to plant her roots, they could see the lights coming on in houses filled with families whose stories were just beginning. Some of those families had found stability through jobs at Thompson Auto or guidance through Victoria's literacy programs. Others had simply been inspired by the example of two people who'd chosen love over convenience, authenticity over expectation. The grease-stained coveralls still hung in Mike's closet next to Victoria's teaching clothes, symbols of the different worlds they'd once inhabited. But the marble lobby where their story began felt like ancient history now, replaced by kitchen tables and school auditoriums, soccer fields and community meetings where real life happened. Emma would graduate as valedictorian, just as her parents had hoped, but more importantly, she'd learned that success meant different things to different people. She'd seen her father choose integrity over profit, her mother choose teaching over corporate power, and both of them choose each other over easier paths. The lessons she'd learned in their modest house would serve her better than any trust fund or family connection. Years later, when Emma brought her own children to visit their grandparents, she'd tell them about the day a desperate woman in an elegant blazer sat down next to a nervous mechanic in a marble lobby and changed 3 lives forever. She'd tell them that real love wasn't about finding someone who matched your circumstances, but finding someone who matched your values. And she'd tell them that the best families weren't always the ones you were born into, but sometimes the ones you chose to build together. The story that began with deception had become a testament to truth. The arrangement that started with mutual benefit had evolved into unconditional love. And the fake marriage that was supposed to solve temporary problems had created permanent happiness for 3 people who'd learned that home wasn't a place on a map. It was wherever your family gathered to share their days and dreams. Mike Thompson had walked into that corporate lobby feeling like he didn't belong anywhere. He'd found his place not by changing who he was, but by finding someone who valued exactly the man he'd always been. Victoria Sterling had spent years playing roles other people had written for her. She'd discovered her authentic self by choosing a life that honored her heart rather than her family's expectations. Together they'd proven that love could cross any divide, that families could be created through choice as much as blood, and that sometimes the most unexpected partnerships could build the strongest foundations. Their story would continue in the lives they'd touched, the community they'd strengthened, and the daughter they'd raised to believe that anything was possible when you had the courage to be true to yourself. In the end, the CEO's daughter who'd said, "Act like you're my husband," had found something more valuable than any corporate merger or strategic alliance. She'd found a husband who didn't need to act like anything other than himself, a love that didn't require performance or pretense, and a family that had been built on the solid ground of mutual respect and shared dreams. The poor single dad's reaction had indeed changed everything, not through grand gestures or dramatic transformations, but through the quiet consistency of a man who understood that real strength came from knowing who you were and refusing to apologize for it. Mike Thompson had never needed to prove his worth to anyone except the woman who'd chosen to share his life, and the daughter who'd learned from his example that dignity couldn't be bought, sold, or taken away by anyone who didn't understand its true value.